Here are the 5 top TSP investment strategies for 2025. I'm going to let you know why they're going to work better than any professionally managed fund or anything you try to do yourself. These are set it and forget it strategies that I've been using myself for the past 25 years. These are going to work no matter what's going on in the world. Doesn't matter who is just elected or who's getting laid off or interest rates or all that. These lessons apply to several things in life outside of politics, economics, interest rates, real estate market. The issue is you shouldn't try to time the market. And I'm going to give 2 recent examples. When money managers or yourself try to time the market, here's what happens. The first time that Trump was elected, a lot of people were upset. A lot of people were surprised, and a lot of people figured, well, the stock market for sure is going to dive. We're all screwed. They took their money out of the market because it didn't want that drop to happen to them. The stock market did not drop. It just kept marching up, and it's really marched up from then until present day. Number 2, same exact thing with COVID. When COVID got crazy and the world shut down, some people took their money out of the market. Some of the same people that already got screwed the first time when they took their money out for Trump's election. They took it out again because, oh my God, the world's going to end. I don't want this stock market drop to affect my retirement fund. They took it out, and guess what? There was a temporary small dip, but man, it just shot back up. And those people missed out on the massive gains from the last 5 years. Now, I'm going to be talking about something called the S&P 500 index today, and that is what these 5 strategies are mostly linked to. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why you don't want to let professionals manage your money for you. And you should just use one of these strategies. You pretty much buy the funds, set it and forget it until you retire and need to start taking that money. It's very easy. Warren Buffett is probably considered the most successful investor of all time. And in 2008, he made a bet, a very interesting bet. He wanted to make a bet with any money manager, any hedge fund that thought they could beat just the S&P 500 index over a 10-year time frame. I believe the bet was for $1 million, and that money was going to go to charity. In the first year of this bet, the stock market died more than 30%, and the S&P 500 index was in jeopardy. And I think there were 4 other funds competing with it, and they were all ahead. Because of that drop, it took a few years for the S&P 500 index to catch up. But by the 7th or 8th year, it wasn't even close. And before the 10 years are up, the losers of the bet had already admitted they'd lost. Over that time frame, the S&P 500 index was up 85%. The hedge fund that made the bet had 5 other separate funds running against it, and the only one that was even close was at 62%. Then the next one was 28%. One of them only made 3%. The hedge fund averages 22%. To the S&P 500 index, 85%. When professionals can use all their training, all their time, all their resources, their entire groups of people making 6-figure incomes with 6-figure bonuses, their only job is to outperform the S&P 500 index. Most of the time, they can't do it. In fact, let's do some research. How often do money managers over 20-year time frames outperform the S&P 500 index? It's not a good track record. It's 8%. 92% of the time, the S&P 500 index outperforms, and that takes no fees, no commissions go to these fat cats on Wall Street. It's no work on your part, and you win 92% of the time. I love this strategy. Let's quickly talk about some S&P 500 index facts, and then we'll dive into the 5 top strategies. Over the last 60 years, the biggest rise in the S&P 500 index in 1 year was 37.6%, and that was in 1995. And the biggest drop was in 2008, and that was 37%. So while 1 year's returns can be crazy, longer ranges do very well. In the last 10 years, the average return was 11.3%. 5 years, the average returns were 15%. When you compound those 5 years at 15%, your money's almost doubled. And I've seen that in my retirement and my investment accounts. It's awesome. And since 1960, 10.2% on average. This is a great strategy. Picking one of these strategies will outperform 92% of people that you can pay to invest for you. And the hard part is you don't know which 8% will outperform. And I don't think they do either. The number 1 strategy, I love the simplicity, simply the S&P 500 index. And you invest in this by using the C fund. The C fund in the TSP mimics the S&P 500 index, 100% C fund. This strategy will beat almost anybody else you know that's investing their money, whether they're doing it themselves or professionals. Number 2 is Warren Buffett's specific strategy for how his money be invested when he passes away for his wife's inheritance. And it's just a small tweak on number one. When Warren Buffett dies, he is not directed that Berkshire Hathaway, his company, invests the money right after he's gone. He's directed that his money be put in the S&P 500 index, 90% of it, and then 10% of it in short-term government bonds, which is 10% in the F fund, which is bonds, is very safe, almost like cash, just makes a few percent a year and very stable. Moving on to number three, this particular strategy comes from the book, The Simple Path to Wealth, written by Jim Collins, a good friend of mine. I think it's the best financial book out there. I think it's only about 5 years old. It's got tons and tons of reviews now. I don't know how many countries it's in now, 20 maybe? I think it's in China now. He is a big advocate of something called the Total Stock Market Index Fund. He talks about doing it at Vanguard, which has very low fees, and just putting your money into that and pretty much do nothing else. Now, this is very similar to putting your money in the S&P 500 index. It's just that the S&P 500 index is a collection of stocks from the largest 500 companies in the US. And the total stock market index also includes medium and small companies, which tend to be a little more volatile. The total stock market index fund is mimicked by using in the TSP 80% C fund and 20% S fund, which is small and medium-sized companies in the stock market. That's not going to make a massive difference, but a small difference. It might outperform over the long term, and it might lose a little more money. But really, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just kind of what little tweak you agree with. Number four seems to be the most popular one because Dave Ramsey is so friggin' popular. I used to have this information on a blog post, and it was all typed out, and it was how to invest your money in 2018. And it was an extremely popular blog post. And most of the traffic came because I was talking about how Dave Ramsey would invest in the TSP because he has specific guidance for this. And I'm going to give it to you now. He has two ways of doing it, a conservative and a less conservative approach. Take your pick. His conservative one is 80% C, which is S&P 500 index, 10% S, which focuses on medium and small companies, basically the leftover smaller ones from the S&P 500 index, and 10% I fund, which is an international fund, invests in stuff all over the world, including emerging markets. The less conservative one is 60% C, 20% S, 20% I. I'd go with that one. And now what we've all been waiting for. I'm going to reveal how I invest my TSP. This is the most popular and sought after secret on the internet, and I'm revealing it here right now. Drum roll, please. That was a weird drum roll. 50% C fund, 50% S fund. So it's 50% S&P 500 index, or the biggest 500 companies in the US stock market, and then 50% S fund, the medium and small companies in the stock market, which is a little more volatile. So I'm heavier on those small ones than the total stock market index because I like having a little more volatility, maybe a chance to make a little more money. How are you invested, and are you going to change anything? Drop it in the comments for me. Now, I've got one more important thing for you that can save your butt in making sure you have enough money for retirement. So just hold on. But I want to say, any of these 5 strategies, you're going to beat 92% of professionals. You're going to beat 99% of individuals that are trying to invest their own money, especially if they're trying to time the market. I'm going to give you an important tip to ensure that as you approach retirement age, the money you have invested is safer, is less subject to the up and downs in the market. If you remember investment strategy number 2, Warren Buffett has a buffer of 10% F fund, basically 10% of bonds. If the stock market rises a lot, it rises a little less. And that's the downside. But when the stock market drops a lot, because you have 10% in bonds, which is kind of like saying you have 10% sitting in something safe like cash, you lose less. Well, the idea here is as you approach retirement age, or certainly as you approach 59 and a half, which is when you can start withdrawing from the TSP, you should put your money at less risk of these big ups and downs in the markets. Think about the years I talked about, 2005 and 2008, where the ups and the downs were like 37%. You couldn't take that drop in the year that you were retiring. That'd be devastating. There's something called the rule of 100. I've adjusted it to the rule of 120 because the rule of 100 is a little overly conservative for me. But the rule of 120 works this way. You take the number 120, you subtract your age, and that is the percentage of money that should be invested in the TSP, right? So a 30-year-old, 120 minus 30 is 90. 90% of the money should be invested in the TSP, in the funds we talked about, and 10% should be put into something safe, like the F fund, which is government bonds. Conversely, when you're 50 years old, 120 minus 50 is 70. Now I should have 30% of my money in the F fund to keep things safe. This should keep happening even after you retire. You shouldn't have your money 100% invested in the market and subject to all the ups and downs. But you can afford to do that when you're younger. Have you subscribed? Because I'd like you to. Hit that like button for me. Drop a comment. It really helps me out. I want to know how you're invested in the TSP. And if you're going to change anything, this is Rich on Money, signing off.